Over the last few years on Good Friday, we've had a vigil from 12 noon to 3 p.m. that's been organised by the New Lake Kirk, normally in their own building, but last year it was in the old BHS shop in the town centre to be among where the people were. It's lasted the 3 hours and been divided into 20-minute slots, which generally have had a video clip, a hymn, a reading, and a minister, different ministers in each slot sharing on the passage that they've been given. So I'm going to just share what I did last year on Good Friday in that vigil. The reading was from Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2 and 11 to 14. So I'll just read that now. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Amen. And may God bless us through the reading of his holy word. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus said, "You have said so." That question and answer remind me of another conversation that took place in an entirely different context earlier in the Gospel, where Jesus was asking the questions and the disciples were giving the answers. In Matthew chapter 16 we read, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven." The same question lies at the heart of both these exchanges. The purpose of the discussion initiated by Jesus is to find out if the disciples understand his true identity. Pilate's interrogation is also to establish that same identity, or at least Jesus' perception of who he really is. Jesus begins by asking the disciples in more general terms who people say that he is. Obviously, the answers that they give, he is seen to be somebody very special. I would consider it a high honour indeed to be ranked alongside great men of God like John the Baptist, Elijah and Jeremiah. However, Jesus pushes it further. He makes it more personal. "But what about you? Who do you say I am?" To which he gets this amazing answer from Peter. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Peter crossed the line when he made that statement. When people had wondered if John the Baptist was the coming Messiah, he was quick to dispel that notion. "But one more powerful than I will come, the thongs of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie." Later in Acts, when Barnabas and Paul were mistaken for Zeus and Hermes, and the crowds wanted to offer them sacrifices, they were greatly distressed. They tore their clothes and rushed into the crowd shouting, "Men, why are you doing this? We too are only men, humans like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and sea and everything in them." Jesus was different. He was prepared to accept the adulation and even went as far as to say that this was a revelation that Peter had received from God. When Pilate asked the question, "Are you the King of the Jews?" He's more concerned about investigating the charges that have been brought against Jesus than establishing his true identity. We sing in one of our Christmas carols, "Lo, within a manger lies he who built the starry skies, he who throned in height sublime sits amid the cherubim." That truth staggers my imagination. How incredible that the creator of the universe, the king, not just of the Jews, but of all creation, should take on human flesh and live among us, born into our world as a helpless baby. How absurd that we should find him standing before Pilate, being judged. Pilate may have been important in human terms, but he was still a mere human. The Creator stands being judged by his own creation. And yet, who was actually judging who? Pilate thought that he was in control. He was under the impression that he had the power of life and death over Jesus. However, the reality was that Jesus actually had the power of life and death over him. As Jesus pointed out to him in John's account of this story, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." Jesus had submitted himself to following God's plan for our salvation. The Apostle Paul was later to write, "We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one might receive what is due to him for the things done in the body, whether good or bad." No doubt Pilate was completely oblivious to the irony of the situation. At the risk of possibly going beyond what Scripture actually says, I get the impression that when Jesus says, "You have said so," he infers, you've said it, and you're spot on. But do you believe it? Do you understand the implications of that truth? Are you prepared to act on it? I wonder, are we ever a bit like Pilate? Do we stand in judgment over Jesus when the reality is that it's at his place to be judging us? Do we question his love, his goodness, his wisdom? Do we question whether his commands are really meant for us? Do we think we know better than he does how we should be living our lives? When we proclaim him as our King, do we do so without following through the implications of what that means? Like Pilate, have we said so without following through the implications? Let's just pray. Lord our God, on this Good Friday, when we consider the irony of the Creator being judged by his creation, and we know we can be guilty of doing exactly the same, may we acknowledge him as our King, not just by our words, but by our lives. Amen.